The shafts, wall, and windows of the tower drew together below him, and seemed everywhere only just thick enough to bear their own weight. Everything was clean and new. The 80-foot lights of the windows, 2 in each of the 4 sides, the platforms and uprights, the ladders and newly adzed beams were clear with present light. He felt the same appalled delight as a small boy feels when first he climbs too high in a forbidden tree. He felt his head swim, and encouraged his own dizziness and caught breath by squinting straight down, 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 hole after hole, depth after depth, to the distant world of the crossways. The pavement was as dim as the bottom of the pit had been, discoloured by depth and the dullness of ground level. Then the dizziness passed, to leave thought and delight behind it. Of course! So a bird must feel, free in a world of branches and the liberty of wings.
My father's novel, The Spire, is of course a novel about putting a spire on a cathedral. But it's also, I think, a novel about writing a novel or painting a picture or undertaking any huge creative task. It's about the cost of that task and about the process.
The Spire is rich with portentous symbolism and portrays its medieval world so vividly that the reader cannot help but be transported back to the early Middle Ages. Its narrative structure is unusual. Golding tells it in the third person, but the narrative is in no way omniscient. We see events in the novel through the eyes of Dean Jocelyn, which can at times lead the reader on a bewildering but exhilarating journey of his building obsession.
He lifted the latch carefully so as not to make a noise. He bowed his head as he passed through and said, as he always did interiorly, "Lift up your heads, O ye gates." But even as he stepped inside, he knew that his caution was unnecessary, since there was a whole confusion of noise in the cathedral already. Matins diminished, its sounds so small they might be held in one hand, was nonetheless audible from the Lady Chapel at the other end of the cathedral, beyond the wood and canvas screen. There was a nearer sound that told, though the components were so mixed by echo as to be part of each other, that men were digging in earth and stone.
My father taught at Bishop Wordsworth School in Salisbury Cathedral Close, and he describes looking out of the classroom window where he taught, which had a view of the spire, looking at the spire and considering, how would I build that? How would I cause it to be built? What would it be like? It's perhaps surprising, but my father was a very practical man. He could actually make things. And he thought of building the spire in terms of the sorts of things he knew about, like boats. And so he thought, how would I build a boat? But he had the imagination to make the transition from working in wood in his mind to working in stone, to dealing with that very unyielding material.
We find out how Dean Jocelyn looks through the carving that the stonemason makes of him. Jocelyn denies his looks. "I'm not as beaky as that." His eyes are blind, a metaphor for the falseness of his vision and for later events that Jocelyn becomes deliberately blind to. It is thrilling to visit Salisbury Cathedral and find some of the key places in the novel. For example, Dean Jocelyn describes how he wants his tomb to look. Himself without ornament, lying stripped in death of clothing and flesh, a prone skeleton lapped in skin, head fallen back, mouth open. Thomas Bennett's tomb in the cathedral is remarkably similar to Golding's description.
There had been sun before, but not like this. The most seeming solid thing in the nave was not the barricade of wood and canvas that cut the cathedral in two at the choir steps, was not the two arcades of the nave, nor the chantries and painted tomb slabs between them. The most solid thing was the light.
One can gaze at the pillars supporting the mighty spire and see how they bend under the strain, reflecting the metaphorical and literal strain of the spire in the novel. The builders disturbed the peace of the cathedral with their lewd songs and blaspheming, and eventually the cathedral has to be closed for all religious services. Today, silence is respectfully observed despite a healthy number of visitors.
I think it's also the quality of working in stone made him realise that anybody who caused that sort of thing, the spire to be built, against all the odds, against all practical advice, would have to be not only driven but also ruthless, prepared to sacrifice himself, but also quite possibly other people.
Now, Jocelyn, we are going to help you into heaven. And what is heaven to me, unless I go in, holding him by one hand and her by the other? Ascent. I traded a stone hammer for 4.